Good morning, guys. Can you hear me? Good morning, guys. Can you hear me?
Hey, Mr. Murray, we can.
All right, if you guys want to, go ahead and get started on the warm-up. I'm going to give about 5 minutes for the warm-up. Those of you guys that are coming in, go ahead and get started on the warm-up. You have 5 minutes on it. Those of you guys that are coming in, go ahead and get started on the warm-up. You have about 5 minutes. Those of you guys that are coming in, go ahead and get started on the warm-up. You have about 3 minutes. Jasmine, can you hear me now? Those of you guys that are coming in, start on the warm-up. You have about 2 minutes. You guys have 1 minute left on the warm-up. Yeah, just start working on the warm-up. We're about to go through it. All right, guys, we are going to go ahead and get started. If you just got in here and you haven't fully gotten the warm-up down, that's okay. I would write down number 1. I will let you know it is a period 1 review question. So if you haven't taken the period 1 and 2 review on my AP, I'm giving you a free answer through this, but it only helps you if you actually know what the answer is. So let's go ahead and go through this warm-up. If you would like to answer, just type like hand or something like that into the chat, and then I'll call on you. But I want you to say the answer out loud verbally, because that way people who are listening to this chat later on know what the correct answer is as well. All right. So number 1, which of the following most likely motivated Parliament to pass the Navigation Act? Again, just type in hand if you want to answer. All right, Marie? B is right. The desire to pursue mercantilist goals. Again, mercantilism was this idea that colonies made money for their parent country. The United States' parent country was Great Britain. So this was the Navigation Acts were laws to where the U.S. could only trade with the British, so made the British more money. Okay, number 2, something you're going to be seeing a lot more of are document questions, where I want to make sure you guys understand the summaries of the documents. So for number 2, summarize what the document is trying to say about the Cold War policies of the 1950s. Again, you can just type in hand if you want to try to guess. All right, Zora, what do you think?
That the introduction of missiles during the Cold War went over their budget and the government started overspending.
Good. Yeah. And since they started to overspend, what got sacrificed were what's on these cars right here. So if you see like school construction, welfare programs, space development, civil services, so other things are getting pushed out for these big nuclear weapons that we are starting to build up. And if you didn't hear what Zora said, she said that with these missile programs starting up, it started to spend money on other things. That's right, Cameron. I am calling on people. Okay, so let's go now to Today in History. For Today in History, these have been all the Today in Histories that you should have had since we've been out. This will be my last time that I'm putting all these up like this. But if you need them, you can come back to them if you haven't written them down. I will be posting this lecture again on my website, so it will be easy for you to come back to this. This is just more of a reference of where you can find this in the video. Let's go ahead with our Today in History today. It's kind of a sad Today in History. Today's date is April 3rd, and the year that we're going to talk about is 1968. April 3rd, 1968. And on April 3rd, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. would give his last sermon in Memphis. The next day, he was assassinated by James Earl Ray. Martin Luther King Jr. would give his last sermon in Memphis. The next day, he would be assassinated by James Earl Ray. All right, as you're finishing writing that down, let me kind of explain where Martin Luther King Jr. was in his life. He was leading something called the Poor People's Campaign. And this was actually a pretty controversial thing that MLK was leading, where basically he was trying to talk more about wealth inequality than he was necessarily racism. But what he had basically figured out was that there wasn't enough wealth in the Black community for the Black community to be able to sustain itself. So they were always going to have to depend on other communities to fund them for their community. And so he was trying to get more money into the Black community. And he figured out the way to do this was to actually talk about poverty, not basically just as a race issue, but as a big issue in the United States and trying to unite all poor people. This was controversial mainly because he wanted to have what was called a guaranteed income. He wanted for people to not be able to make less than a certain amount of money, which if you kind of think that through can kind of look like communism a little bit, where basically you would take out the poorest people and the people that would be funding the poorest people would now be the wealthiest. And this is one of the reasons why people like the FBI and things like that were actually tracking MLK at the end of his life. This campaign did have a little bit more violence in it than previous campaigns. MLK did not support the violence in this, and that's actually why he was in Memphis. The first time he came to Memphis, the protest that he was leading actually kind of broke down and became more violent, and an African-American teenager was actually killed. And he left Memphis, but he promised to return. This is going to set up his assassination because MLK was actually pretty secretive about where he was staying and when he would be staying there. So that people could not kind of be waiting for him if they were wanting to hurt him. But this broke that tradition, and he stayed at the same hotel in Memphis this time as he had last time. He was assassinated when he went out he was staying at a motel, so kind of imagine like a hanging balcony, and he went out to smoke a cigarette and was shot by somebody with a rifle across the street. And that was James Earl Ray. Now, there is some controversy about potential conspiracy theories of did James Earl Ray do this alone, or was he set up by the U.S. government for this? It's been investigated a lot. Probably the person who brought the most attention to this was Coretta Scott King, MLK's wife. Did not believe that James Earl Ray did this on his own. And one of the reasons why was because the U.S. government thought that he was communist, so they definitely had like some motive to take him out. One of the biggest pieces of evidence that would show that James Earl Ray did do this on his own was he said he was going to do it. His friends and family have testified multiple times that he had actively been wanting to kill MLK for a while, and he was a big-time racist. So MLK was assassinated on April 4th, and he would give his last sermon. I'm going to read the last part of his sermon because it is very interesting that these are basically the last public words that we have from MLK. He said, "We got some difficult days ahead, but it doesn't really matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. He's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as people will get to the promised land." That's how his last sermon ended. All right. So that is your today in history. Now, things that you should be working on. You have a couple different things due today. It's not spring break quite yet. Quiz 15, you need to take by tonight, by midnight. It's due at midnight tonight. It will shut off at midnight. You need to take crash course 35 and 36. That is also cut off at midnight tonight. And then paper 4 is due to me through email by midnight. I have the AP review up. The first assignments are up on my website. Next week, it's spring break. And I want you guys to know, you do not have anything due over spring break. There is nothing required for you to do. I will be posting some stuff on spring break, in case you get honestly bored, because there's not a whole lot to do right now. And you can start on those things next week if you don't want as much to do the week you get back from spring break. So what I will be posting is your study guide, and I kind of put that in parentheses because your study guide is just going to be a review for period 7. And I will be posting all the makeup crash courses on my AP. One note that I want to make, all quizzes will be reset every single week on Monday. So what that means is you have the opportunity to retake a quiz multiple times. Now, don't do it because it will count as multiple retakes. You still only get 3 retakes for quizzes and 3 retakes for crash courses a year. But I just don't want anyone to be confused if you come back on my AP and you're like, wait, I already took that quiz. Don't worry, it's in the grade book. You'll see it in the grade book, but I just want you to know what's going on with that. I reset it every week so that people have the opportunity to retake it. All right. Any questions about this stuff? We'll talk more about the paper at the end of this. No? All right, cool. So last class, people asked me to put up a table of contents. Again, we're not going to really waste time for people to have to copy this down right now. But if you are somebody who needs organization, this is right here for you. And again, this will be posted on my website. So you don't need it necessarily right now, but this is where it is in these notes. Okay. Again, for people who like organization, there will not be another binder check. Binder checks are too hard. So Marie Jose, if you haven't taken the quiz yet, you still have until Friday. So go on my AP. You didn't put my last paper grade in. Jasmine, just text me about that. All right. So these are the notes that we'll be taking today. Just Truman and Eisenhower notes. All right. Oh, and would you look at this? We got a picture of Dwight Eisenhower right here. He's just an adorable man. Oh, and we had another picture of Dwight Eisenhower. Hold on 1 second. All right, so I am a big fan of Dwight Eisenhower. Here are a couple Dwight Eisenhower facts, just because everyone should know some things about Dwight Eisenhower. Both political parties wanted him to run for president. Both the Democrat and Republican Party wanted him to run for their political party. The reason why he actually ran as a Republican party is because somebody just started his campaign for him. They put him on a ballot without his permission, and he won on that ballot in that state, and that kind of incentivized him to run. He was a 5-star general. He's only one of 11 5-star generals that we've ever had in our military. And he was insanely popular as a president. After he became president, he served 2 terms as president. He went back to being a 5-star general, which is pretty impressive. He also loved to paint afterwards, and apparently he was pretty good, but he was an incredibly humble man, so he didn't talk about his paintings that much. His paintings were actually put on an exhibit in an art hall in New York one time, and when reporters asked him about this was the only public quote that we have about his own paintings. He says, "They would have burned this shit a long time ago if I hadn't been president." So that's just the basic nature of Eisenhower. All right, title of your notes for today is Eisenhower and Truman, Social Issues. Yes, Sam, I'm assuming. What's your question? Are you just figuring out that you can raise your hand? All right, you're allowed to go to the bathroom without asking me. Jack, 5-star generals, it's like different ranks. So like brigadier general is like a 1-star, which means you're not in a like you're not really a general yet, I guess. And then like there's just different levels of generals after that. All right, so the title of your notes is Eisenhower and Truman Social Issues. Now, before we start these notes, I got to tell just a quick story. All right, I've drawn this diagram. I'm pretty proud of this, that I was able to figure out how to do this. So me and my wife dated for about 3 years, and while we dated, one of the things that we were really both fearful of was that we would be in a relationship of convenience. And you may understand what a relationship of convenience is, but you maybe have never heard the definition. It's this idea that you've just dated somebody for so long that it's more convenient to just continue to stay with them than to actually break up. All your friends are now the same. You'd have to kind of like divorce your friends. It's a whole big messy thing. So I was really pretty terrified that me and Emily, my now wife, were in a relationship of convenience. So what we decided to do one summer collectively was make our relationship somewhat inconvenient. And you guys gotta understand, my wife is an amazing human being. She's about to start like running this whole COVID-19 testing clinic at Georgia Tech. So for our summer of inconvenience, what she decided to do was go to Africa. She went to Kenya for a medical mission. She worked with interdisplaced people. Kenya had a lot of political violence in 2008. And about 1 million people were displaced. And so she went to those camps and helped people get basic health care, which, you know, what noble ideas. I went to Costa Rica to learn how to surf. And that really kind of parallels our relationship. So one thing that I really liked to do when I went to Costa Rica was I love to spearfish. I figured out how to spearfish. And so the best place to spearfish was right here where this circle is. There was this big rock kind of in this cove, and you couldn't get to this cove because there were big cliffs that didn't go down to it. So what you'd have to do is you'd actually have to go down to this public beach right here, and you'd have to swim really far out. This is about 500 meters. And if you don't know what 500 meters is, think like 5 football fields. It's a pretty far swim. You'd swim out to this middle part, and then you'd swim over to this rock, and you could spearfish around this rock. And it was pretty fun. So there was one day that I was doing this, and I had 2 friends that were with me. So those 2 friends, they stayed on the beach. I did this swim. This swim probably collectively was like a mile. So it takes me about probably 25 minutes to swim a mile in open water. So I'm swimming, doing this, and one thing about Costa Rica is it's like jungle, and jungle can change incredibly quickly. So I come up as I'm spearfishing, and all of a sudden I notice that there's these massive storm clouds moving in very, very quickly. So I decide that I need to get out of there. So I start to swim back, and as I start to swim back, I make it back to the middle point. So I'm the furthest away, and the storm hits, and it's really, really choppy water. The wind's blowing really, really hard. I'm starting to get a little scared. I'm a really good swimmer, but like you're in the middle of the water, and it's kind of terrifying. So what I decided to do, because the chop was so intense, is I could hold my breath for a long time. So I would just hold my breath. I would swim under the chop. So I'd go maybe 2 to 3 feet underwater, and I would like just hold my breath for as long as I could under this choppy water. And as I do that, I've done that about 4 times. I see the one thing in open water that you never want to see, which was a shark. So I saw probably a 10 to 12 foot bull shark. I didn't know what a bull shark looked like, but I knew it was a really, really big shark. I knew it was much bigger than me, and I later found out that it was a bull shark, and I'll tell you why. So I sit still for a second, and how far the fish was away from me is pretty difficult to determine. I'm going to say that it was probably 20 to 30 feet away from me. And I'm just completely sitting still in this water with this shark 20 feet away from me. And the shark is also sitting relatively still. And I kind of think at this point, like, if this shark comes at me, I don't have any idea of what I'm going to do. I had a spear in my hand. So I was like, I'm probably going to stab this thing, but it's going to get pissed off and it's just going to eat me. And I wasn't really afraid that it was going to kill me. I was afraid that it was going to bite me, and then I was just going to bleed out in the middle of this ocean. So I sit there. It feels like forever. And but it was probably only 5 to 10 seconds. And then the shark slowly swims away. And I became like Jesus in that moment and walked on water, basically. I swam faster than I've ever swam before to get back to this beach. And I made it back to this beach, and my friends have actually already left the beach because it had started raining, and I guess they weren't that good of friends. And so I tell them this crazy story. And this was like the second to third last day that we had. And it was probably one of the closest things I really feel like that I could legitimately have died in. And, but I didn't. And so I got like really like reflective about life. And, you know, they say things like flash before your eyes when you're like near death. And I don't think things flash before my eyes, but when I got home, or like when I was being reflective about life, the thing I really felt the most was that I wouldn't have gotten to say goodbye to Emily. And I would have just like been bitten by the shark. I would have bled out in the ocean, and she wouldn't have known what happened to me. And that made me really, really sad. And that was actually the thing I decided that I would marry Emily. So I proposed actually to Emily once we got home. So the reason why I tell that is because World War II is like seeing a shark in open water for everyone. If you came home and you were alive, you all of a sudden married basically whoever you were with. So you guys can go ahead and start copying this down. And this is called the baby boom. So the baby boom is basically when these soldiers came home, if they had a girlfriend, they got married to that girlfriend, and there were more babies born in World War II than any other time in American history. To this day, we have a big, big amount of people that were born during this time. Yes, they are now called boomers because they're old and they control everything because they all vote. Do I think there's going to be a quarantine boom? No, I don't. I think there's actually probably there's probably going to be like a divorce spike, I feel like, more than a quarantine boom. So the GI Bill was also passed during this time. And the GI Bill was to help World War II veterans with getting services that they needed. One of the biggest things, though, was education. And we still have the GI Bill today, which is if you serve for 4 years in our military, the military will pay for a certain portion of your college. So the GIs are coming back. They're getting educated. So a mass amount of people are going to college that weren't going to college beforehand. So we see the college rate spike in the 1950s. Another thing that the GI Bill allowed for was home loans. To this day, GIs get certain amount of like a discounted home loan rate. So it was cheaper to get a house. So what this leads to is people are being born at a rapid rate. People are able to get college education, and more people are getting houses. This leads to our first massive suburbs called Levitt towns. Yeah, I'd write this down. And if you look at this picture to the right here, this picture to the right is of a Levitt town. And one thing you'll notice is that all these houses are similar. Now, beforehand, neighborhoods used to have individual architects. So you'd maybe have somebody just design 1 to 2 houses. That's why if you go to older neighborhoods, Grant Park's a good example of this, all the houses look relatively different. Well, suburb development's going to be completely different. These are called Levitt towns. They were named after a guy. His last name was Levitt. And he designed all of these houses, but all the houses relatively look the same, which is why if you go out to suburb properties today, that's how they kind of look as well. They all look the same because they're all built by the same builder. Everyone done writing this down, or do you need more time? Just shout if you need more time. Okay. Yes, this will be on my website afterwards. Not the actual PowerPoint, you'd have to watch the video. I'm recording this right now. All right, we're gonna keep going. Adam, stop complaining, just write it down. All right, now, the second thing that you want to know about during this time period of social issues is the National Highway Act. The National Highway Act was created, which one of the biggest things that you need to know about the 1950s is that there was a lot of fear. There was a lot of anxiety going on in America, more anxiety than had ever been had before. And this anxiety stemmed from nuclear attacks. People were very, very afraid of a nuclear attack on the United States and the United States not being prepared for it. So we created the highway system. It's called the Interstate Highway System. We still have it today. Any highway that has an I in it is part of the Interstate Highway System. So I-85, I-75, I-20, we have 3 highways that go through the United States, or go through Atlanta. And these highways were actually created with the idea of evacuation. If we needed to get everyone out of a city because of a nuclear strike really, really quickly, highways would be the way that we could do this. The biggest roads out of Atlanta before 1960 were Ponce de Leon and Peachtree Street. Moreland was the 4th biggest road in Atlanta. So if you think about that, highways are going to make it much, much easier to travel far distances. So mobility is going to increase for citizens, which is going to be another reason why suburbs are going to expand. Suburbs really, really start to expand in a major way in the 1950s and 60s. And that's because of the interstate highway system and this baby boom. Those are the 2 big things. Correct. From this point on, I'm not uploading PowerPoints, just lecture videos. Now, our highway system is incredible. It's the most advanced highway system anywhere in the world. One of the reasons why Atlanta has such bad traffic is because we have 3 highways that come through it. We're really the only city that has that. And not only that, we have 2 of the biggest highways come through it, and then they merge together. So I-85 and I-75 are 2 separate highways, and they actually merge to just form what we call the connector. And highways have a system. If it's a 5, it means the highway goes north and south. So I-85 and I-75 go north and south. If it's got a 0, it goes vertical, or it goes horizontally. So I-20, for example, I-10, those are vertical or horizontal highways. And then if it's a 3-letter highway, like 285, it means it goes around in a circle. All right, anyone need more time on this? Right, I'm gonna give 1 more minute. All right. So the 1950s also really starts the civil rights movement. Now, the first civil rights president that we really have is going to be President Truman, meaning he actively starts to try to make the United States a less racist place as the president. And the way he does this is by integrating the military. So black and white soldiers will fight together. Now, why this is so critical is because in the military at this time, we still have about 2 million people that are in the military. People from all over the world. Sorry, all over the country, not the world. And as these soldiers are fighting with one another, they are having to interact with different races in a way that they would have normally not interacted with. And you're talking about life and death scenarios. So the Korean War is really seen as a big example of actually the civil rights movement, because black and white soldiers went and fought together for the first time. And it didn't matter if you were racist or not. If you were a soldier on this side and somebody helped you with the different skin color, all of a sudden you started to feel differently about your racial views. Now, another major thing that's going to happen by Truman is Earl Warren is going to become the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He created something called the Warren Court. And it's not something really that was created. It's just what the Supreme Court is called when Earl Warren was Chief Justice, because he was an incredibly liberal Supreme Court justice. So he tried to get a ton of different things through that would have probably not normally been passed. Yeah, Olivia, what's up?
So I used like the integration of the military in my essay, but
Oh.
I had a different date that I put in there. I
So-
had June 25th, 1941 executive order 8802.
Yeah, good question. So that is the military industry. So that would not actually be soldiers fighting. That would be like people who are making bombs and jeeps and other like materials for the military. But during World War II, black and white soldiers did not fight together in active combat.
All right.
Right. Anyone need more time on this? All right. Yes, you do need more time. If you need more time, just unmute your mic real quick and then say, I do, because I've shut the chat. Okay. So one of the biggest cases that's going to be passed is Brown versus the Board of Education. Now, Brown versus the Board of Education, to give background, Plessy versus Ferguson was another Supreme Court case, and it made segregation legal as long as it was equal. What that meant was black and white schools would exist, but ideally what was going to happen was black schools and white schools would have the same amount of supplies. And that is not going to be the case. It was never the case. Black schools were always given secondhand stuff from white schools. White schools were heavily more funded. So the ruling comes out, this is with the Warren Court, that education cannot be both separate and equal. So this overrides Plessy versus Ferguson. Now this happens in 1954. And it's a very, very slow rollout of integrating schools. So for example, the first Atlanta schools that were integrated was Grady High School. And that happened in 1960. So we're talking 6 years after this. But part of the reason why this was so slow was because we had separate schools, so you had separate neighborhoods. You had black neighborhoods and you had white neighborhoods. And the districts were drawn in a way to where still all black students would go to black schools and white students would go to white schools. So when Grady was actually integrated, it was because of something called the bus program, which would bus students from black schools to white schools to integrate them. One really, really important thing to note, especially for your next quiz, 16, is that Eisenhower fully supported this Brown versus the Board of Education, and he supported it by sending troops to Arkansas. The Arkansas governor basically came out and said that he was not going to allow for integration of schools, and we actually had it today in history on this, where Eisenhower sent 1,000 paratroopers to a school to force them to integrate. And what this shows is that if a state tries to do something that the federal government deems illegal, the federal government can come in and force the state to comply. So Brown versus the Board of Education, huge, huge, important Supreme Court case. Anyone need more time?
Just like 10 seconds, please.
All right. Anyone else need more time? All right. So something else that was going on during this time that kind of makes Eisenhower awesome, in my opinion, is that NASA was created. Because in this Cold War with the USSR, it wasn't just about ideological strength. It was really about economic and technological strength as well. Who was the smartest? And the hardest problem that could possibly be solved pretty much during this time was who could get to the moon first, who could conquer space. And the interesting thing about the space race was the United States was behind basically the entire time, up until the very end. 1957, the USSR launches the first satellite into space, and it's called Sputnik. And I like that it's called Sputnik because we call it Sputnik like it's a name. Sputnik just means satellite in Russian. So it's the first satellite into space. And what this showed is that the USSR was more advanced in technology than the United States at this time. The complicated math that it takes to get something into orbit, the USSR was just better at that point. And one of the reasons why is the United States education system was still heavily focused on social sciences, debate, arguing. Whereas the USSR had moved more to the idea of science and math. So the US is going to invest heavily into science and math after this with the National Defensive Education Act. And I do want you guys to know, like, I think you're getting kind of screwed over with us having school online and, you know, all that stuff. But it's not the first time people have gotten screwed over with that stuff. For example, if you were in school in Georgia in 1958, when the National Defensive Education Act came out, things changed overnight. If you went to a Georgia high school before 1958, you were required to have 1 or 2 math classes, depending on where you lived in the state, to graduate from high school. Now they upped that to 3 within a year. But colleges, if you were applying to certain colleges, they upped it to 4. So it was possible that you went from needing 1 math class to go to college to 4 math classes in a year. And so there were some cases, my uncle was actually an example of this. He wanted to get an engineering degree. He had to take 3 math classes his senior year of high school. And how that looked was they just went to the same class every day for 6 hours. And I think he did Algebra 2, Pre-Cal, and Calculus all in 1 year. This is also going to lead to a mass investment in technology. And a company is going to start called IBM. And they're going to create this thing called the computer. Now, computers were technically created during World War II, but modern computers, how we think of them today, are created in the late 1960s or late 1950s, early 1960s. And we will eventually get to the moon before the USSR. So we won the space race. But the biggest impact is that it caused for us to invest a lot in math and science, which is something that has continued for 50 years, 60 years. Anyone need more time? So what was it like to live in the 1950s? Everyone was afraid. Fear and anxiety drove social identity in the 1950s in America. People were fearful that the economy was going to collapse because they had come off this World War II boom that we had never seen before. People were fearful that communism was spreading. There was a fear of nuclear annihilation, a nuclear war. We were fearful of who had more missiles. It was a really, really big deal who had more missiles. Even though you only need about 10 to 20 missiles to wipe out most of the world, people wanted to make sure that we had more missiles than the Soviet Union, which caused us to stockpile our nuclear weapons to crazy numbers, 30 to 40,000. And this led to what's called the Second Red Scare. So the first Red Scare is after World War I. The second Red Scare is after World War II, which was there was this fear of communism that was being infiltrated in the United States in the 1940s and 50s. Now, here's the difference between the first Red Scare and the second Red Scare. The first Red Scare made sure to try to push people out. So we didn't let immigrants come in. The second Red Scare attacked from within the United States. Who is in the United States that's already communist? And if we found out that they were communist, you would be completely what's called blacklisted, ignored.
Why do people hate communists so much?
So during this time, it just became kind of this big idea of like it's us versus them. It doesn't. There's no like real logical reason why you would. You can obviously understand why people maybe would disagree with communism, but the reason why it got to this level was just because it became this mental mentality of it's us versus them.
Yeah, because I understand like the fact that, you know, the richest person will have to, you know, I understand that whole part,
Yeah.
but I didn't think it was like that serious that people were actually like really like didn't like communism.
Yeah. Well, one thing about communism that you want to make sure you understand, because it's not just about social equality. That's like socialism. Communism is really like the government has total control over your life to where they decide things for you. So they decide what religion you're going to be. They decide what art is going to be published. They decide what's in the newspaper. So there's like no real freedom in communism outside the government. And I mean, that's it makes sense why people would be scared of that. Governments usually, when they have too much power, become pretty corrupt and scary. But this like hatred of people who even thought it might be a good idea, that just was because of you're against me, we're at war, I hate you. And I mean, this like affected people as like that were super, super famous. If you've ever heard it, there was a guy named Charlie Chaplin. And Charlie Chaplin was probably the most famous actor in the 1920s and 30s. He was a comedian. And he all of a sudden disappears. And if you don't know why he disappears, it's because he was labeled a communist. And so because of that, he was blacklisted. All right, last slide. So like today, there are some people who use that fear to gain popularity. And we see this all the time, that when people are fearful, people prey into people's fears to gain popularity. I mean, it's as small things as like when a winter storm comes, the weather does not play down the weather. They definitely make the weather like a really, really big, scary event. And it's because if they're like, it's not that big of a deal, you're not going to watch. But if they're like, this thing, it's really, 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 really bad, then all of a sudden you're going to tune in. It's kind of the opposite of COVID-19, this coronavirus. Like a lot of people actually played it down until this point that we're at now, where all of a sudden it's kind of beyond our control. And it's a really big deal. But the guy who's going to do this the most during the second Red Scare is a guy named Joseph McCarthy. And Joseph McCarthy, this is called McCarthyism, was a senator who was not incredibly important. He was from Wisconsin. But he said that he got a secret list that had all the names of people in the government that were communist. Now, here's the thing. If you said that that's not true, you just called BS on Joseph McCarthy, he would say, that's very interesting you say that, because you know who's on this list? You are. And so he would go after all of his enemies. Thousands of people were fired. He hosted these, what you're seeing on this right-hand side, he hosted these ridiculous television court hearings where he would be holding these documents and saying that, you know, this is a person who's a communist. And this went on for a really long time, and people did start to think that maybe he was full of it. And then he went after the military. He went after the army and said that there were military generals who were also communists, and people then were like, that's not true. Enough people came to their defense that he lost all of his allies. And one thing just to note, this is always compared to the Salem witch trials. If you remember the Salem witch trials, of basically someone saying, you're a witch, and then all of a sudden there's this trial and they're killed. This is a modern version of the Salem witch trials, is McCarthyism. All right, so this is notes. These are all the notes that you guys need. We're done. If you don't have anything else that you need from me, we're good to go. I hope you have a great spring break. Don't forget to turn in Quiz 15 crash course and your paper by tonight. If you have questions about the paper or anything else, feel free to stay on here and just ask me. I'd be happy to answer.
I have a question.
Okay.
How come it doesn't show you your results for Quiz 15?
How does it show you the results?
It doesn't. It doesn't tell you what you got.
It takes a couple hours, or like you usually have to wait till the next day.
Yeah, I think there's like a results tab. I will be posting grades on there pretty quickly, so you'll see what you made by Monday.
I did mine like 2 days ago and it still hasn't shown up.
Okay, I know what you made. I'll type it to you privately, Rosie, because I already put yours in, or I already started writing them down.
I don't really know what question to ask about the paper. I'm just like really struggling to write it.
Okay, what's the complicated thing with it? So let me guess. All right, so there's only two things I find kind of complicated on this paper. All right, the first thing is understanding national identity. And the second thing is that there's about as many documents that show that national identity changed as national identity didn't change. So because of that, sometimes you might be reading a document and you're like, I have to force this document into this like system of change when it's actually showing that something didn't change. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I just got to, so I told myself I'd just do 3 documents instead of 6, and then just get all the other points first before I add more documents.
That's not a bad idea at all.
I feel like every time I go to write something, I'm answering like what caused to change, and then I have to like I automatically keep trying to say like what caused the change and not what changed.
And I wouldn't get too hung up on that, especially if you're just trying to go for the 3 document point. Because the only time to be really, really picky is if you're trying to go for the 6 document point about that. So if that's like your big hold up, don't stress about that too much.
And then if I use that other date that I was talking about with the military, do I need to change that? Because that kind of changes my whole argument.
Yes, because the U.S. I mean, you could still argue that like leads to a decrease in racism if that's what you're arguing. It would just be a different. You would just want to make sure that you talk about it as the defense industry and not the actual U.S. military.
Okay. Well, I used it as part of my PETA for like the time portion because it was right before the war or
That's
the
fine.
U.S.
You can do that. Just make it just change everything to the defense industry and not military.
Okay.
Yeah, Anthony, what's up?
We gotta do PETA.
If you're going for the PETA point, yeah. So you need 3 PETAs. If you go watch my paper tutorial, I give you one of them. So you just need 2 more.
Okay.
Yep. What's that? I can't hear you.
Ashley, your microphone does not work.
Sounds like you're really, really far away from it. Those of you guys that are messaging me in private, just ask me out loud. I'm getting a lot of stuff. Type it all out fast enough.
Is there a place that shows like everything that we have to do for that?
Yeah. For what? Sorry, for the paper?
The AP review.
Yeah. If you go on my website, there's an AP review tab.
Okay.
And it's got a list of everything for each week. I've only posted 1 week right now. I'm only doing it 1 week at a time, but I'll be getting ahead while I'm on spring break. So during break, you should see like multiple things pop up.
Mr. Murray, could you go back a slide, please?
Yep. Samara, you need to use at least 4 documents or 3 documents to get 1 point, and then 6 documents if you're trying to get 2. And guys, I would recommend there's a district like hearing or like a district question and answer today. And I would recommend listening to that. It's going to be on Facebook Live. I think there's going to be a lot of information there.
What time is that?
It's at noon.
Okay, cool.
AP also posted, we'll talk a lot more about this later, but for those of you guys who are interested, AP did post what their test is going to be. It's going to be a 45-minute test. It's going to be on May 15th, and it is going to be a DBQ. So it's an open note DBQ. So in certain ways, it's going to be easy. The hard thing is it's going to be really, really fast.
Are we going to be recorded?
So what they'll probably do is make you lock your browser. You'll have to download a software to lock your browser.
Okay.
I'm hoping this is like a very, very big long shot, but I'm hoping that what we can do is that by May 15th, maybe they'll let us open the school and like practice social distancing in the school. But have a central place to where if you need like a computer and just like a quiet space to work for those 45 minutes, you could come up there if you wanted to take it.
How many people at Maynard would be taking the AP exam?
How many people?
Yeah, like how many students?
Well, each class I think has different test dates. But for like ours, we'd have like 140.
Oh, damn.
But I don't know if they'll do that or not. The second thing, though, that's why I'm wanting you guys to do everything handwritten or like have the ability to print it off. If you don't have a printer, you can email stuff to me and I'll try to print it off for you. But since we'll organize things by period, it will allow for you to be able to go through your information really, really quickly.
Mr. Murray?
Yeah.
So you know how colleges are like not requiring SATs for like us in the fall?
Uh-huh.
I think they're gonna void this semester's grades.
I think they're gonna answer that at noon.
Okay.
My guess would be that we're gonna have some type of pass-fail system, which I've already started to like brainstorm if they take away like the idea of you guys getting a number grade to pass-fail, what you'll need to do for pass-fail. And I'll let you know most of that sets up with making sure you take all the quizzes and you have above a 70 average on the quizzes and turning in the AP review in a complete way.
Do you think it'll be optional to choose like pass-fail?
Like by teacher?
Yeah, like in some colleges you can choose whether you want a pass-fail or if you want your actual grade.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would.
Like, this semester was supposed to be the semester I get my GPA up.
Yeah.
And if it's just pass-fail, then it's not going to affect my GPA.
Right. That's a good question. I'm not sure. We'll see. I think that's the best. That would be the best system.
Mm-hmm.
It would probably be the most work on teachers. But they don't really care about us right now in like this situation. That's fine. Like I think you guys are in a much more screwed over position at this point, so I'm willing to go the extra mile.
What is pass fail?
It would just be like, it wouldn't affect your GPA at all. Your GPA would stay the same. And it would just be like, you get credit for this towards your graduation, or you don't get credit for this towards your graduation.
Okay.
And again, they'll probably talk about that. I'm assuming they're going to talk about that at noon on this Facebook Live. But
if you have it.
what's that?
Can you post the link to that if you have it?
The link to what?
What this video conference?
Oh, yeah, I will. Here, I'll actually chat right now.
Mr. Murray, I got a question.
Henry language, and do that in this chat, please.
So are we just having the DBQ as the AP exam, or do we get multiple choice?
It will just be a DBQ.
So but how many DBQs?
It will be one question. It will be one like prompt.
Okay, and I have another question.
Thank you, Ms.
So
Murray.
the PETA that you gave us, we can use that, right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
The only thing you can't use that I gave you, and I was like very, very clear in the video, is the outside information. And that's because it actually wouldn't really be fully correct. But I just wanted to show you how it should be set up.
You
Yeah.
can counter with one of the documents, right?
Yep, definitely. Yeah, Jonah, you guys can leave. This is just for people who are wanting to talk or have still.
Mr. Murray.
Yep.
What'd you say about number grades?
I was just speculating. I don't want to like make you think that is going to happen or not going to happen.
Wait, but Ms. Murray.
Yeah.
Last time you speculated, literally the next day, what you said would happen happened.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens with number grades. Jackson, are you still getting track workouts?
Yeah.
Okay.
Bruh.
All right, guys. Well, I'm going to go. If you have questions, message me on Instagram. I'm going to be. What?
Did you say you cut out?
I'm going to go. I'm doing a hard cutoff on all answering questions at 4:00 today. So if you have a question for me, ask me by 4:00. Otherwise, I'm not going to answer because I have stuff I have to do today. Most of the time, I don't. All right. Talk to you guys later.
See you.